All right. Let me unmute first. Just a good morning and a good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today for this really important briefing on Georgia's upcoming elections. On behalf of the German Marshall Fund of the United States, we want to welcome you to today's conversation on behalf of GMF's Frontlines, a democracy initiative in Washington, and German Marshall Fund's Black Sea Trust for Regional Cooperation in Bucharest. We're really pleased that you could join us today for really such an important panel. And we have some really great speakers coming to us from the civil society community, but also expert community in Georgia. As many of you know, Georgia's upcoming parliamentary election at the end of October is a particularly consequential election for Georgia. And looking at Georgia externally from the outside, GMF has long played a role in support of Georgia's democracy, its democratic transition, support for civil society, and independent media. And so we're really pleased to have this conversation because when we look at the elections in Georgia, we recognize how important it is for Georgia's continued trajectory, its Euro-Atlantic integration, but also to address some of the deep challenges that Georgia still faces, including occupation of a large percentage of its land, continued hybrid aggression from Russia, including recent reports suggesting that maybe even some Georgian political parties are receiving funding directly from Russia. But this has direct consequences when you look both from Europe, from the EU, and from the United States. The importance of Georgia has never been more in the spotlight. But we see also with the conflict amongst two of its neighbors right now, that there is fragility in the region, in the South Caucasus. When you look at the Black Sea region as well, you see deep challenges. And so this election is happening not only in the context of what's happening domestically in Georgia or increased polarization in Georgia politically when you look at polling, but it's happening as a number of external factors are impacting Georgia and its region and Georgia's partners in the United States, but also in Europe. And so we're coming at this from a perspective of a friend of Georgia, wanting to see Georgia succeed. Not lost in all of this is the COVID-19 crisis pandemic that's impacted Georgia like any other country. What's interesting in Georgia is that you look at polling numbers from the summer that were done. I think NDI, and there's also some IRI information. You're looking at a government that has been perceived as doing a good job in responding to COVID-19, which has been a challenge for all governments. But you also have the potential for another wave, an increase, hopefully not, in rates of those that are infected with COVID-19 and that are impacted. So there's lots of challenges for any government right now, let alone the domestic political challenges. And I also just wanted to raise as well, I mean, over the last year and a half plus, there's also been domestic challenges and turmoil, including electoral laws that were eventually changed. And what I think many people externally are very happy to have seen the Georgian government and parliament pass new laws that many believe will help level the playing field in Georgia. And so I think there's been some progress. Sometimes it's two steps forward, a step back. When I look at those of you who are joining today and participating, I know you've all been, you're veterans from media to elections to combating corruption to foreign policy, but you're all veterans of what's taking place in Georgia and sort of looking ahead. So what I wanted to do now, and because we really want to get to our speakers, and by the way, we hope that this will be the first of two in a series of events leading up to the Georgian election that GMF, along with our colleagues in Bucharest and here in Washington, and I'm going to turn to my colleague Brittany, who's a non-resident fellow at GMF, but also one of the real experts on disinformation, countering disinformation, and has been part of the GMF team for quite some time. So I'm going to turn it over to Brittany, but I wanted to just thank you guys, just all again, thank you so much for joining us. And I think there's a strong belief, and this is particularly from GMF, which has long played this role through Black Sea Trust in supporting civil society, that you all are really so critical as anchors of Georgia's transition and have been for the last 2 decades. So, so thank you for being here, and really looking forward to hearing from you, because you have a perspective that is truly unique and important as a voice of the Georgian people in this upcoming election. So with that said, I wanted to just turn it over to Brittany. If I can turn it over to you, and thank you also for helping to co-organize this and pull this all together. Also, my colleague John Alexander in Washington, D.C. as well. So if I can turn it over to you, Brittany, just to kick us off, to introduce our guests, but also to help get this conversation started. So over to you, Brittany. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. And welcome everyone, and thank you to our panelists. Just some brief introductions. Gigauri is the Executive Director of Transparency International Georgia. Elene Nizharadze is the Executive Director of International Society for Fair Elections and Democracy. Hatia Jinjikhadze is the Media Program Officer for Open Society Foundations in Georgia. And Ambassador Batu Kutelia is a former Georgian ambassador to the US, and I apologize for my pronunciations, but hopefully everything worked. Just a brief overview of the flow of this event today. We are first going to hear from each panelist that talking about the electoral environment at the moment, and why this election is so important to Georgia's continued democratic trajectory. Then we are going to turn to each panelist to discuss specifics about their work and what they're seeing in their spaces. For example, ISFED will speak about pre-election monitoring. I know Hatia is going to talk to us about some social media monitoring and the political space. So with that, I would like to go ahead and turn it over to Eka for your comments on, why is this election so important to Georgia, and what does the landscape look like at the moment? Eka, you're on mute.
Okay, so thank you very much for organizing this event. Thank you to Brittany and Jonathan and to GMF. You are always great friends to Georgian civil society, and we always have opportunity to use your platform in order to send the message to those in DC who are interested in what's going on in Georgia. So you rightly asked this question. So the main question here is really, yes, why these elections are important for Georgia, and also how the outcome of the elections will impact Georgia's ability to address domestic and international policy issues. But before moving to this, to the question of this, to the answer of this question, so I think that we should actually remind those who are listening to us what is going on now in Georgia and what is the state of affairs here. So first of all, of course, everyone knows that the Georgian Dream Party, led by Bidzina Ivanishvili, is controlling Georgian government from 2012 already. This summer, as Jonathan mentioned, so the Parliament of Georgia made particular amendments to the Constitution of Georgia, and now we have the new, more democratic electoral system with the 1% of threshold, which means that the smaller parties will be able to enter the parliament. We have number of public opinion polls. Apparently, that's the trend now in Georgia, that every week we have such polls, but there are some credible ones, for instance, published by IRI, according to which GD has 33%, the UNM 15%, European Georgia 4%, and then other parties around 18%, and we have 25% of undecided. We also have the results from the public opinion polls from the Caucasus Research Resource Center, and according to which 80% of Georgians are waiting for a new political force to take over. So media environment is extremely polarized, and my colleagues will talk about this. One tendency that we have is that Georgian Dream representatives are refusing to participate in the debates with the opposition. So the government, as also it was mentioned, was very effective in dealing with COVID crisis, and that's why they have now bigger support. And also the government used this opportunity. Actually, they have introduced lots of social programs. Some of them are reasonable, some of them are electorally motivated, and the perception of the public now is that this money comes from the pocket of the ruling party, not from the taxpayers' money, and this is the difference in Georgia. So what is special also about the pre-election environment here is that pro-Russian groups became very active, and some openly pro-Russian candidates are running for the office, including, for instance, the executive director of Primakov's Foundation. The far-right group Georgian March also created the party, and they also run for the office. There are a number of cases or the media reports when these particular people having contact with the special services of Russia, but we don't have the investigation, the criminal investigation on this issue, so the government did not initiate any investigation on that. So this is like more or less what we have now. But now, like to answer on those your questions, so why these elections are important? I think that after having this more democratic electoral system, we have a bigger chance to have more balanced distribution of forces in the parliament. So for many years, we had the problem in Georgia, which was related to the concentration of power in the hands of one political party. They, in most of the cases, had constitutional majority. So, and that was actually a problem, and that affected our independent institutions and created obstacles for development of independent institutions. Now, if we have the coalition government, so it might be the chance to have more balanced management system in the country. It will also definitely increase the role of the parliament in our country when it comes to its oversight functions. And this is very important. And it will definitely minimize the political corruption in Georgia. It will also put Georgian politics on the new level where parties have to cooperate in order to form the government. This is also very much needed for our reality here. And also it is a big chance for our country to become more trustful and stable partner for the Western partners. And with this, of course, to have more expectations to closer cooperate with the NATO and the EU. Of course, we will have challenges here, and the challenges mostly might be related to the will of Georgian Dream not to hold democratic elections, or for the less ability of the opposition parties to consolidate the power or to make sure that they can bring changes to the society. Of course, the COVID-19 pandemic might affect the turnout of voters. And yes, we might also have Russia influencing our elections, and take into consideration the government does not do anything with this. So it might be a big challenge. So this is it from my side, and my colleagues will elaborate on particular areas. Thank you.
Thank you, Eka. And just quickly, I also would like to remind all of our participants, well, I guess the audience, that we have a Q&A session following the presentations. So if you have a question, please just go ahead and add it to the Q&A, and we will be calling those in the last 30 minutes of the presentation. Elena, I would next like to turn it over to you, given ISFED's role in pre-election monitoring. If you could also discuss kind of what you're seeing in terms of any kind of inconsistencies that may kind of affect the outcome, and why this is an important election in terms of ISFED and ISFED's role in civil society.
Hello, Brittany. Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here, and thank you to everyone who was involved in organizing this very important meeting for us. So as regards Georgian election, it's really one of the maybe, let's say, so historical elections for Georgia, and Eka made great short overview why we consider it very important. The one thing I just want to add is just since we have like this history of democratic development, usually our experience is that any ruling party could stay in power only for 2 terms, and actually for Georgian Dream, our ruling party, it's already like expiring second term. So it's also quite also challenging and very interesting to see whether they will be able to maintain the power and stay as a one ruling party, or they will have to create a coalition, which is a great opportunity for Georgia to make a next step for the political development and democratic development generally, and that we are hoping very much. As regards general situation, as you know, now officially we have pre-election campaign, and we are monitoring this campaign, and we were able to identify a number of serious problems that we think has have very negative influence on the pre-election environment in Georgia. First of all, as Eka mentioned, with the COVID-19 situation, we have quite a new, unusual challenges, as in many other countries, also in Georgia. Unfortunately, I should say that the ruling party, Georgian Dream, is using this situation for political purposes, because we have monitored a number of social projects that were initiated by the ruling party in order to influence will of the voters, in order to gain support for the political party. And it's quite also challenging for us to evaluate this situation, because on the one hand, we know the state is responsible to provide assistance to socially vulnerable citizens, but on the other hand, we have the very high interest in equal and fair electoral environment, and this type of projects really gives huge advantage to the ruling parties, because opposition parties do not have the possibility to use this opportunity. So this is a really serious problem and challenge during this pre-election campaign. And besides that, we have, for instance, already the very increased number of physical violence and intimidation cases, intimidation, pressure, mostly directed against activists, supporters of opposition political parties, which is one of the most serious violations. And also there are a number of cases related with abuse of state resources, again attributed of course to ruling party, because in Georgia only one party has access to this type of resources, and this also gives you a huge advantage, whether it will be like financial, human resources, mostly civil servants involved in the campaign in favor of the one political party. And also, unfortunately, we have the practice of vote buying cases, which is very sad to say, but this method is widely used in Georgia, and in that case, not only by ruling party, but also by opposition political parties. So all this together, just to say it generally, creates quite a negative picture, which is not, of course, in accordance with international standards, and it doesn't satisfy the requirement of fair and equal electoral environment. Besides that, one important issue that I want to elaborate is the Russian influence that Eka has already mentioned. We have, like, with these new changes, amendments to the electoral system and 1% of threshold, which is very positive. On the other hand, it creates more chances, including for, of course, pro-Russian political parties. And actually, for these elections, we have an increased number of this type of parties who are already registered and are running in elections. And one of them, the most influential, which is parliamentary political party, Alliance of Patriots, and recently, just a couple of weeks ago, there was disseminated information by a Russian investigative project dossier that this political party receives funding from Russia. And not only funding, but also assistance in conducting, like, their pre-election campaign, which is quite alarming for us. And as my colleague said, unfortunately, the problem is that it's not only in respect of elections problematic because foreign funding is prohibited in Georgia, but it also, as far as it is coming from Russia, and Russia occupies 20% of Georgia's territory, it is serious challenge in respect of state security. But the situation here is that for unclear reasons, governments, respective state authorities refuse to conduct the investigation. So we really do not know whether it's substantiated information or not. But one thing is obvious, that the information that was spread is quite in accordance with their pre-election campaigns. They are conducting, for instance, anti-Turkish campaign that we have witnessed from Alliance of Patriots, especially in Ajara region, which is bordering Turkey. And the main purpose is, of course, to stimulate, contribute to the ethnic, religious hatred, and to increase this aggression in the society. Which is also which is serious problem. And just not to take much time, I want to say that it's not only one example how Russia tries to interfere in Georgian elections. The second method that they are using is social networks and the campaigns they are conducting via social networks. And this experience not only for Georgia, but also for US and European countries. For instance, we had this Newsfront, pro-Kremlin news agency, which started operation in Georgia just 1 year before elections in October 2019. And the main tactic of this network was to distribute selective information and to contribute to raising aggression, antagonism between different political groups. This was directed against opposition political parties, and also very interestingly against also the government. Also, this is related with the decisions of the government in relation of trying to control COVID-19 situation. And these operations were conducted with the help of mostly fake accounts. So this is just like to see the situation, seriousness of the situations from all aspects, because, for instance, possible alleged funding of political parties, which is direct influence, is not the only method that Russia was using, but also they were trying to spread pro-Russian, anti-Western, anti-American messages also among users of social networks. Luckily, this network was took down by Facebook just in April, but of course, this does not give like this very positive decision, but does not mean that they will not try. They are not trying to do this type of campaigning through other methods. So this is very generally, sorry for like taking too much time, but this is just very generally about the challenges we are facing here and which have direct influence on the election process. Brittany, you are mute.
I'm mute.
Sorry, I thought I had. Thank you, Elena. I mean, that is a very good overview of how the Russian Federation is becoming more brazen in its actions in Georgia and in democracies throughout the transatlantic space. It's interesting to me that they so openly, in contravention of Georgian law, found to be, funding the Alliance of Patriots. And so my question for you is, how do you see this playing out? Do you see charges being brought against Alliance of Patriots? Is it dependent on the outcome of the election? Could you just, and Eka as well, since you mentioned this, could you just say a couple of words about how you see that kind of playing out here?
Yeah, it's actually, the problem is here is that as the both of us mentioned, law enforcement bodies refuse to conduct investigation. And without investigation, we cannot talk about any sanctions. The only thing they have done, they referred the case to State Audit Office, which is responsible for oversight of political party funding, but actually we do not have any information how they are proceeding with the investigation of the case and if there is like any reaction from their side. Because usually State Audit Office is restricted in the their resources are restricted, and I'm not sure if they will be able to investigate such a serious case like about the funding from foreign country. And besides that, the only way we could use as an NGO here is that related with anti-Turkish campaign, we have addressed Central Election Commission, and actually in this case, they were quite effective, and they find the political party for video clips that they posted on their social networks with these anti-Turkish messages. So this is really situation with the investigation of those cases. But again, I think the most important would have been to look at this case from state security perspective, which can do only like appropriate respective state authorities like State Security Agency or Prosecutor's Office or Ministry of Internal Affairs. But it seems that we will not have clear answers on this case. Yeah, maybe Eka will add also.
No, just to be like really short. So yes, there were, as I mentioned, there were different cases. So one was related to Patriot Alliance. So, and it was about the funding, which is prohibited by the law to get funding from the outside of the country and from the different nationals. So, and apparently it was Russia. It's not like, you know, the others, it was like really Russia. So, and it's really related to the security of the country. Then there were consultations. So apparently the Russian foreign agents or the Russian, like, you know, the people linked with the special services in Russia. So we're giving some instructions to the Patriot Alliance, how to deal, how to split the country, like in a sense, like the people, how to like disseminate different messages and all that. And then what we are saying here is that, you know, it's not only about the illegal funding of the party, which is the task of the State Audit Agency to investigate, but it's also about the criminal activities as the political party was allegedly cooperating with people linked to the special services of Russia. So, and it's not only the duty of the State Audit Agency to look at this case, and from the side of the government, the criminal investigation was not initiated, which was the problem. There were other cases as well. For instance, the person from Georgian Marsh, and he was also, he had also phone conversation that was disseminated in Georgian media with the person linked with the acting member of Duma. I mean, like, you know, and then he was promising some things to this person, like, you know, telling him that he will be the main representative of the Russian Federation in Georgia. So, like, you know, why the special services, national security agencies does not ask the questions about this? And this is, like, you know, for me, this is the clear message to those far-right groups linked with Russia and this pro-Russian groups, that they have green light, you know, and no one will touch them. Does not matter. Even before, when they were organizing violent demonstrations, calling on violence and all these kind of things, and there were no reactions from the government, or some investigations were initiated but never ended. So that's the, like, really concerning trend that we observe in Georgia.
Thank you. You know, as you well know, this is not an issue that is unique to Georgia. Obviously, Georgia suffers from having, you know, Russia occupying its sovereign territory and meddling, you know, going to extreme lengths to meddle. But we here in the US woke up to that in 2016 as well, and we're still struggling with how to confront that and deter that activity. So perhaps in the Q&A session, we can get into some more detailed, maybe kind of policy responses from the international community. In the meantime, I would like to turn it over to Hatia to discuss what we're seeing in terms of the media environment. I know there have been some accusations that Parliament, which is led by Georgia Dream, sought to control media plurality in the guise of disinformation. And so I was wondering kind of what you have seen that means for the opposition media and just the media space in general.
Thank you, Brittany. Well, one thing that we could all agree upon is that Georgian politics are never dull. And so is Georgia's media environment, because Georgia's media has always been on the front line of country's political life. Well, if we compare Georgia to other countries in the region, one may say that Georgia is doing more or less okay in terms of media freedom. But it doesn't mean that we don't have problems with media freedom. We do have problems. And these problems are becoming more acute during political turmoils and before elections, as you can imagine. I would like to talk about some key issues that are shaping up current media environment in the country. And I would like to start with critical media. You mentioned opposition media. When I say critical media, I mean those commercial broadcasters that are not under government control, and they are bold to scrutinize government policies, to report about corruption, nepotism, human rights abuses, etc. And we have quite a few in the country, but they are the ones who are going through most difficult times right now. Last year, there was an investigation launched by Georgia's prosecutor's office, against several critical broadcasters. These are Tavariaki, TV Formula, TV Pirveli, who are known for this critical, insights. This was under the charges of embezzlement against the leadership and owners of these channels. Then there were court hearings, and in the beginning of this year, these court hearings unexpectedly stopped. But the problem is that even if no legal measures have been taken, these cases are still in the pipeline. And they may resume anytime. They may resume either before elections or maybe after elections, we don't know. And this is something to keep a close eye on. There was another investigation launched by State Security Service against Tavarial Arfi on the charges of sabotage, and there is an investigation, it's ongoing. We don't know what kind of results it's going to bring. Now let's look at the cases when journalists are attacked and what is the response that law enforcement agencies are giving to that. Well, Georgia is a country which was always proud of its safe environment for the journalists. But, you know, last year when we had street protests in front of the parliament in June, you know, and there was the rally was dispersed by special forces. We had 40 journalists injured and wounded. So these were very easily identifiable people with signs and microphones, etc. But 40 of them were wounded, and some of them very heavily. But what is more important, that nobody up to date is being held accountable for that. And these days we see occasionally, you know, some violent groups, far-right groups, or aggressive individuals, or clergy, or government representative, sometimes physically abusing journalists, or being verbally very aggressive against them, threatening them. And what is unfortunate, there is no response from law enforcement. There is no proper investigations going on. So that gives journalists the feeling, and the journalists, especially from critical media, they have this feeling of insecurity. They feel that they are not protected, and the reporting that they, you know, produce is risky. Well, I would like to talk very briefly also about the campaign that the government has launched against critical media. We see it everywhere. We see statements by top officials, by mid-level officials, local government representatives, using very derogatory, you know, terminology and labeling media, you know, and this is spreading all around. And we also see what is more damaging in pre-election period. Ega mentioned in her introduction, the ruling party representatives, they refuse to participate in talk shows hosted by critical media, which is very damaging in pre-election period. You can imagine citizens need to make informed choices based on something. And if we don't have full-fledged debates, then that's difficult to do, right? I would like to say a couple of words about our regulator. This is the only regulating body that we have is for broadcasters, for all broadcasters. And even if it's mandated by the law to be impartial and independent, not to carry any political interest, this is not the case. And during last years, we've seen on many occasions how harsh they have been on critical media and how loyal they've been towards pro-government media. Recently, they launched a site. It's a media critic platform, which is run by a group of loyal to the government media specialists. And they are addressing mostly critical media, you know, labeling them, you know, criticizing them. Criticism is fine, but they are turning completely blind eye against those media outlets that are spreading anti-Western sentiments and sometimes even clearly pro-Russian propaganda. You know, we have two non-commercial broadcasters in the country. These are public broadcasters. These are different from American concept, European-style broadcasters that enjoy considerable public funding, and their independence is secured by the Constitution of Georgia. But and they are mandated to serve public interest. But unfortunately, what we see is one Georgian public broadcaster showing clear bias. At least that was the case in the previous elections, against the opposition. And now we see very unfortunate developments on Adjara public broadcaster in a smaller autonomous region of Adjara, where there is a new director who has dismissed up to 20 journalists, and editorial policy now is aligning with the ruling party. That's very unfortunate, of course. Also, I have to say something that I heard yesterday from opposition politicians talking about Georgian public broadcaster. They may not like Georgian public broadcasting, but they were talking about abolishing, the need to abolish Georgian public broadcasting, which is completely unacceptable, and no politician should be in a position to talk about, you know, abolishment, this or that media outlet. And finally, I would like to talk about perspective a little bit, because what we are going to have now, we'll see, but and the trends I was talking about are probably will intensify a little bit more before the election day. But after elections, of course, media freedom is at stake, because we don't know what the results are going to be, and if there is a political configuration which we are all looking for, that's fine. But if the Georgian dream still gains majority in the parliament, then many experts think that there is the risk of retaliation against critical media. There is a risk that those cases that I mentioned are in the pipeline may be resumed, and there may be more. There is a risk that regulator may become more harsh on critical media. And also there is a risk that when journalists' rights are violated, law enforcement is not there to protect them. So this is briefly what I wanted to say, and if there are questions, I would be happy to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you, Hatia. With these restrictions being placed on opposition media, it made me think of the role that RFE-RL plays in the Georgian media space. And I'm sure you're all aware that we had a change of leadership that is now running our US foreign media institutions. And so there are concerns that that could change the type of coverage, the fair and unbiased reporting. And I was just wondering if you could speak to briefly the importance of RFE-RL and other kind of, international media institutions to the Georgian media space.
I'll be happy to speak about radio liberty, because I was listening from my early childhood, lying between my parents to, during Soviet times to their reporting. And I'm still a listener. I was a listener with the previous leadership and with this leadership. And I think they are the ones who serve as a true public service media, as they serve public interest, not any political interest, and as their reporting is always up to date, and they never avoid awkward or difficult topics, and they've done also very well in terms of improving their metrics and reaching out audiences. So this is very encouraging, and for many media experts, they are a very reliable source. Like some other online resources that we have in the country, we have several online platforms which are truly like up to highest journalistic standards, and they are trusted by the public, and their audiences are growing slowly because online is not growing that rapidly. Television is still a king in Georgia. However, that picture is changing a little bit.
Thank you, Hatia. Ambassador Kutelia, I think you've earned the right to speak about whatever you would like to, quite frankly. I know we said that you were going to discuss, Georgia's kind of continued European trajectory, and certainly we would love to know how you think the results of this election could influence that trajectory. But please feel free to comment on anything else you've heard as well. And then following your remarks, we'll go ahead and do some Q&A. So thank you.
Thank you, Brittany. I would like to thank GMF for organizing this event and also for constant interest in Georgia's new and fragile democracy. GMF's involvement and election teams in the previous elections were very instrumental to bring a very sober and good analysis of the entire election process and putting it in a bigger context. And that's what I'm planning to talk. While all these important components of the pre-election and election period have been mentioned by previous panelists, I would like to zoom out a little bit before going to some Georgia specifics, what is happening in the region. And 2 days ago, we had a very unfortunate development in the region when so-called hot peace almost turned to the real war. And that's been a warning that we all knew that at some point might happen, because the international mechanisms that are supposed to guarantee this peace, and not only just to keep the status quo, but really develop to some kind of a legitimate solution, were not very effective. And one of the main reasons why these mechanisms were not effective is that Russia was considered to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. Well, this process has changed recently, starting from 2016, when at the NATO Warsaw Summit, Russia's formal status as a NATO partner had been flipped around, and Russia is now labeled as a major foe for the transatlantic community. And it's not only from a military or like a conventional context, but it's more of this hybrid type of challenges. But on the opposite, let's say if we look on the regional developments, and the Karabakh conflict and recent hostilities clearly showed and highlighted that democracy, to survive in this part of the world and everywhere, needs a security guarantees. And without this type of security arrangements, it would be really hard, almost impossible, to have a sustainable development of the democratic transformation of the country. And that's why Russia is using this type of insecure environment to prove its major conceptual mantra that Putin now formally and officially repeats, that liberal democracy has gone and now it's time to some kind of a new order based on his own understanding of so-called sovereign democracy. So that's why security is important. And from the Georgian perspective, I think Georgia's NATO membership, once again been proved, has no alternative. So while we are enjoying a huge domestic public support for the Georgia's NATO integration, this process has a dual track. One is a more resolved and forward-leaning attitude from a Euro-Atlantic community, but also the importance of the Georgians doing our own homework, and this is keeping and maintaining a democratic credentials. So it's a two parallel tracks, mutually reinforcing. That's why this election will be decisive. I frankly think that now time has come in our region for some unorthodox security measures and the steps to be made. And we see that this is possible with the external leadership, like US leadership, and some of the domestic political will. Peace has a chance. Middle Eastern development recently and Israeli-Arab peace, initial big steps can prove it. But again, some external leadership and unorthodox solutions are needed. So for Georgia, it's important to keep its democratic credentials, and the election is one of the most important stage, because election is not only just the day that we elect, but how we are approaching this election. So do we have the other institutions that guarantees the fairness and freeness of the election? So do we have a rule of law, judiciary system in place? Basic freedoms, are they guaranteed, or this kind of a democracy that we are building is dented with some wrongdoings of the incumbent government, who unfortunately is really embarked itself on the path of the state capture rather than letting the inclusive democratic process. So that's why this election is important, and that's why if this election will be free and fair, Georgia can claim more forward-leaning steps towards the Euro-Atlantic integration. Plus, on top of it, this election is important for the region as well, because I believe that Georgia's accelerated NATO membership will bring more peace to our region. Our neighbors as well, who are currently fighting with each other, they will reconsider what are at stake for them. Either war brings them some benefits, domestic, political, or other, or peace that will integrate them together with Georgia once Georgia leads this process in a European and Euro-Atlantic space with economic benefits and, of course, peace and security guarantees. So that's why I would like to speak a little bit more in a general terms of the Russian influence or Russian attempted influence and interference in Georgia's domestic political life. What I will say how Russia is trying to influence the processes will not be something new either to the US or to some of our European colleagues. Even I can claim that Georgia was a testing ground of some of those methods that Russia is now trying to apply for the US domestic politics interference or European political interference. And there are a number of these, and my colleagues mentioned several of them, but we have to start from what is the Russian interest. Russian interest is to exploit the vulnerabilities of the Georgian domestic political system and undermine the democratic statecraft. So to prove that democracy is not viable form in this part of the world and it fails. But for Russia to make democracy fail, Georgia is the very important country, because Georgia had really ups and downs, but the significant breakthrough in terms of making failed state into the democracy frontrunner in the region. So there are a number of tools, but the major tool that concerns me, how Russia is trying to influence processes, is Russian money. And not Russian money that is visibly and directly going to the pro-Russian parties or entities, because this is visible, and frankly, I don't think that openly pro-Russian political platform will ever fly high in Georgia, but it will create the kind of this Overton window margins showing that, yes, there are pro-Russian parties, but there are others not openly pro-Russian, but doing exactly what Russia wants to do. So that's why this hidden or covert Russian financial influence makes me really worried, because we see with the current Georgian Dream government increased dependence of Georgia on Russian economy, integration to the more Russian market rather than the Western market. Secretary Pompeo recently warned former Georgian Prime Minister to for Georgia to correct its economic integration vector. But unfortunately, it's not happening. So with this increased dependence on Russia, of course, the Russian money creates different tracks while it is used, as I said, directly supporting financially parties or individuals or political candidates, but also the businesses through opening the Russian market and giving a preferable access to those who are more loyal politically towards Russia. And then those Georgian entities who are earning money on Russian market have labels attached to their money to spend on something that is of the Russian interest. So, and we've seen this type of activities through Russian connected oligarchs or businessmen, not at higher scale. So it's a more disintegrated as an instant picture, but connected to major cause, increasing the vulnerability and dependence of the Georgian economy on Russia. So with the dependence, of course, Russia increases its ability to manipulate, because there are many actors who knowingly or unknowingly are executing what this malign influence of Russia in Georgia intends, in parallel of cyber, military, or propaganda tools, which are also part of the strategy. So, and just to finish with the kind of a sum up of the trend that I see in the Georgian politics, is really worrying because with this type of taste of the Bidzina Ivanishvili, who knows how Russia system works and feels comfortable in this system, I see a slow oligarchization of the Georgian politics. So most of the political parties, directly or indirectly, are getting more connected to the one or several rich individuals. I don't have anything against the oligarchs per se in classical understanding on a rich people, but I don't like when they have an instinct of like in other post-Soviet countries, and I hate this term when it applies to Georgia. We are trying to break from being post-Soviet to be European democracy, but with the oligarchs coming on this scene, and we see the toolkit of the oligarchs. They have to own TV or the media platform. They have to own a political party or political candidates whom they finance, and they have to have some NGOs, or right now we have some gongos, government-owned NGOs as well, who are trying to influence the processes or the public discourse. So with this type of oligarchization, we might end up in a situation that we've seen earlier in Ukraine or Montenegro and Macedonia. I particularly are worried because of the Russian influence in terms of the attempted state capture as well. That some recent studies, there was a quite a good study by the CSIS, GMF also published on this foreign money research. The number pops up that the 12% of GDP. So if Russian footprint in countries' economy is more than 12% of the GDP, probability of the state capture significantly increases. So with the Georgian economy and the recent trend, I think we are beyond that threshold, and that really worries me. So with the Russian money, of course, we have other means of the running the country, which is similar or kind of exported from Russia. This is a violence using disinformation, government-owned troll factories, coercion of political opponents and media, and criminal organizations that are molded to the government or the quasi-government or government-affiliated entities. And the lubricant of the entire system is the corruption. And we've seen that there are a number of cases that Western companies, legitimate companies, being coerced because they are independent actors. While we don't see legitimate foreign direct investments, we see some dubious origin money inflow. Right now, this is also in decline. Just summing up with the Montenegro and the Macedonia case, there are a lot of similarities with Georgia. With the corruption increase, the Orthodox Church influence and infiltration by Russia, problems stirred up with the neighbor through Russia propaganda means, infiltration of security services, minority issues. And we've seen what happened in Montenegro. Almost the coup happened because of the Russian special services staged this military coup to divert Montenegro from the NATO membership. The same was in the Northern Macedonia when the Russian propaganda and Russian money with the oligarchs, like in Montenegro, was working against the westernization of the Macedonia, against the NATO integration process. Fortunately, this happened successfully, and attempts to block them from NATO integration failed. Georgia might be a next test ground, and Russia might apply separately or all components against Georgia, because it's not only about Georgia. As I said in the beginning, it sets an example for the wider region, which is really important for Russia. And I firmly believe that the actor that fuels gas to the flame of the conflict in Karabakh is Russia. Therefore, I can assume that Georgia will be Georgia will have much more stakes for Russia to be diverted from democratic path than just a small country with the 4 million people. That's why, in the conclusion, I would argue that in terms of the solution for the Georgia's democratic statecraft, the NATO integration and accelerated NATO integration could be a solution. Otherwise, we could see that the Georgian incumbent government, if they keep the power, their reputation and legitimacy will be dented and easily manipulable by Russia. So they will start riding on the nationalist, ultra extremist ideas, or coercion or attacks on the political opponents. And we might see soon, like it happened in Russia or other authoritarian countries, attacks on the foreign organizations, our partner organizations like NDI, IRI, US aid who are really supporting democracy in this country. So I would like to stop here and would be happy to discuss all of these issues in the Q&A session. Thank you.
Thank you, Batu. I have so many questions. That was wonderful. My first question is about Russia and Russia's strategy. That was a great overview of how they use funding and support for political parties and civil society groups. In other countries, they've set up think tanks. I'm sure they have in Georgia as well. I think they have. To try to influence political speech and narratives. My question is, yes, they are targeting both sides, or essentially, you said they're targeting Georgian Dream, they're also targeting UNM. They know that the pro-Russia parties, yes, they'll enter parliament, but they're certainly not going to achieve a majority. What is their overall political strategy here? Are they supportive of GD? Are they supportive of UNM? Could you maybe talk about kind of what you're seeing other than just this strategy to create chaos and support pro-Russian parties?
Well, that's a great question. As I said, openly pro-Russian party idea will not fly in Georgia. But with GD, we see that GD is very vulnerable, and because of the GD policies or because of the personal taste of Bidzina Ivanishvili, Georgia's dependence on Russia has been increased. Of course, Russia's interest still is not having a strong GD or strong Bidzina running this country. It will be hard to achieve, it will be too expensive. So they would rather prefer vulnerable Ivanishvili and vulnerable GD, who would be easy to manipulate because they are already making country and themselves dependent on Russia and money inflow or the political influence from Russia. So they are interested in a non-functional state in Georgia. So with these small parties entering in the parliament, in one thing is that we really need a coalition government in Georgia, but very fractured political spectrum in parliament might end up with do-nothing parliament, and Georgia might get in stalemate, political stalemate. That will benefit Russian interest and with their infiltration in the system. And as I said, the small oligarchs that might pop up in political spectrum with the small niches, political niches or small niches of economy controlled by them, they will be very easy to manipulate. And this, not really oligarchs, but let's call them oligarchs. These mini oligarchs will not be interested to find the Georgia's Western integration path or accelerated some reforms. They would find much easier language with each other, like we saw in the Ukraine. There were openly pro-Russian oligarchs, there were somewhere oligarchs in between, but when it came to the country's democratization, oligarchs consolidated around themselves because their mutual interest is much higher rather than the country's development. So that's what Russia is trying to achieve. And I think they are very close to achieve this goal because of the economic dependence of Russia and also Russian special services infiltration in Georgia.
Thank you. And of course, I have a question as well about the economic influence. Some of this is, just by virtue of shared history and geography. But what can the US, the UK, and the EU do to try to increase Western investments in Georgia to try to crowd out some of this Russian investment that's coming in?
Well, I think this is one of the key pillars to accelerate Georgia's Western integration. It really would be hard to argue to the Western businesses to invest in Georgia in mass, while Russia has a lot of tools to create a sense of instability in the region and the provocations, borderization, occupation, now the Nagorno-Karabakh issue. But we have a very good example of the strategic Western investments in the region. I frankly believe that recent Russian attempts to spoil Georgia as a relation was linked to this new Southern Corridor gas pipeline, which should start operating in the end of the next month, which will be a big alternative to the Nord Stream and really big infusion of the non-Russian controlled hydrocarbon resources to the European market. And when I'm speaking about the strategic investments, and we had cases of that type of investment when NATO-Russia relations really got spoiled because of some Russia's aggressive revisionism, Northern Distribution Network that was supplying goods and cargo to the ISAF operation in Afghanistan through Russia, Russia blocked it. And we managed to reorientate this cargo flow through Georgia, Poti Port, Georgia, Azerbaijan, then Central Asia. And it worked really smoothly without any problems. And this military application of the commercial route really proved to be successful. Now we need to commercialize it because it has a merit to it, commercial merit, but also the strategic interest. So in logistics, in the ports, now Anaklia port, it's yet another example. That was this strategic investment and this strategic project that would enable Georgia to become a key player on the Eurasian logistic market, connect to the Central Asia. Also, it would increase Central Asian countries like Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, and Turkmenistan's dependence on Russia to deliver their goods to the European market. Not speaking about Chinese, because even without Chinese cargo, that route is commercially viable. And we've seen that suddenly, with the kind of quote unquote strange reasons, the Georgian Dream government, with Bidzina's personal initiative, blocked this project. We see that Kars-Sakhalkalaki railway that connects Georgia through Georgia, Turkey, and Azerbaijan, and then European railway network is not really operational, and it was postponed to be operational for several years. The idea of the strategic investment is also related to the peace process. Because when I was speaking about the peace initiative and the Georgia setting example through its Euro-Atlantic integration to the neighboring countries, I think including Armenia in that strategic projects of the logistic to be connected to Russia will off-hook Armenia from the Russian dependence, energy-wise and also the supply chain-wise. And the COVID-19 really showed that this type of diversification of the logistic will be happening in the world anyway. So why should not we benefit out of it? But internally in our region, there are no resources for it. But with the Western leadership, European companies, American companies with a strategic take, they can really be encouraged to look a little bit differently to our region.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, we have some incredible questions coming in from the audience. I am going to just kind of open this up to everyone. We have a question here. If the opposition is able to form a parliamentary majority, who would likely emerge as PM, as Prime Minister? Who would like to field that question?
Okay, maybe I will jump in. So, yeah, I mean, at this point, it's very difficult to imagine because what we see now is that the opposition, they are in fact not campaigning, they are criticizing each other, they are criticizing each other's candidates in the region also, and also they are like, it's not only criticism, these are the attacks, you know. And of course, they have criticized, for instance, the UNM's intention to put Misha Saakashvili as a candidate for the prime minister. So definitely, if UNM is the one which forms the government, then the majority of opposition parties, most probably, they are not going to support it. And that's the challenge. That will be the challenge for them first, because they are not cooperating now at this moment, and you see the tension between them. At some point, they even forget that, you know, there is a ruling party and they should criticize some activities of the ruling party. But at the same time, of course, it's very bad for the voters. As I said, there is this big percentage of undecided. So, and it's not encouraging them to, like, you know, vote for the opposition, because, you know, the opposition is fragmented and they do not try to find the common grounds. And yeah, I mean, I think they should think about this in advance. Otherwise, we will be in big trouble. But again, so it's very important to for them to start campaigning. You know, that's very important now, and for the people to know that they can bring the changes. Otherwise, they don't, as an outside observer, they don't really look very strong. And I hope that they are going to use these several weeks before the elections to disseminate like, you know, communicate with the public properly. Otherwise, yeah, they don't do this.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Ian Kelly, for that question. We have another question, and this one is directed at Hatia and Elena in particular. What do you think are the chances that the results are falsified by the ruling party? And if so, can you see a Belarusian type scenario develop in Georgia?
Yeah, maybe I will try to answer. Yeah. I think it's not so easy, but I would say it's very difficult to falsify like elections, votes in Georgia, because we are much like developed. It's not like 19th what was happening during like at the beginning when we started building like democratic state. So now we do not have these severe violations like ballot stuffing or like other type of these type of cases. Usually what is happening here, as I was talking during my this brief speech, is that most of important violations happen during pre-election campaign, like abuse of state resources, vote buying, physical violence, etc., which has influence on the elections, and trying to have some negative impact on the decision of the voters. But otherwise, we are not like expecting this kind of severe falsification, like massive falsification on the election day. But we will see. We really do not have that type of expectation. Besides that, we should definitely say that so what is happening in Belarus, it's very positive. It's very encouraging to see how people are fighting for their fair elections and freedom. But Georgia is still quite different from Belarus. So in terms of democratic development, we are much further. So yeah, I do not really at this stage, we really do not expect this type of scenario in Georgia.
Great.
We'll see.
Hatia, do you have anything you would like to add to that response?
I would simply agree with Elene about, and I think my other colleagues also would agree with that the Belarusian scenario is most unlikely.
Can I add several points here?
Yes.
Yeah, so like, you know, I mean, this is something special about the Georgian elections that, and I think in other countries as well, but as I like know more about Georgian elections, that's why I'm saying this. So, I mean, generally these parties are winning elections before the elections day. So this is like, you know, during the pre-election period. And so what we have now is that always the ruling party has more financial resources than other other parties, the opposition parties. And the only exception when we had was in 2012, when on the side of the opposition there was the oligarch backing, like with his money backing the opposition and spending big money, and then there was this government with the administrative and financial resources, and it was kind of like one could say that more or less financial resources wise. Like the both sides had kind of the same, although when the party has administrative resources, it means a lot, and they were abusing this back in 2012. Now what we have is that we have this rich person backing the ruling party, and then we have the government in the hands of the ruling party. So everything is on the one side. And so if we look at the funding and the finances of the ruling party, what is this, right? So this comes from several sources. So one is the budget, the official money that they get. Then another scheme that they have developed, and not only these guys, but the previous administration as well, but as we talk about the Georgian dream. So what they do actually, they give the state contracts to the companies, and then these company representatives or the companies are donating to the ruling party the portion from the contract, from this money that they get at the end, right? So this is kind of like in a very well developed scheme, and it is a tendency that we see now. And sometimes it's a public tender, sometimes it's simplified procurement, but this is the reality that we have. Another trend that we have is that for many years now, and when talking about the corruption, so we see that in the region especially, it looks like the regional, like the bosses or the regional, like the officials, they have actually the green light to get this to enrich themselves. They became very rich, like some majoritarians from the Georgian dream, and their family members. So they spend lots of money, which is not, which might be not registered. So during the election period, and the fourth way to again to influence the voters. These are the social programs, and this is the state budget. And again, the state budget is in the hands of the ruling party. Again, some of the programs are reasonable and many governments are doing this, but the perception in Georgian public is that they get this money from the ruling party, and no one explained them, not the prime minister or others, that this is the taxpayers' money, and be sure that it's not the party budget. So this is this is what makes our pre-election period different. It's a huge money that is spent by the ruling party. Sometimes during the elections, the income of the ruling party is 10 and more than 10 times more than the income of all opposition parties together, and when having this system, and then a little bit using the administrative resources, there is no need to really to falsify the elections during the election day and to change the results on the ballot box. So that's kind of it. And just to, again, just there were some allegations now in Georgia that the government might want to postpone the elections, or it is in the interest of government. There were discussions in Georgia about this, but it's not like this, because for them now it's very crucial to hold the election. Although we have increased number of COVID cases now, and we had the full lockdown when we had 10 cases per day, but now we have 300, a little bit more. And I'm not saying that we should go to the full lockdown, but this is just to show the difference. And then, of course, it's in their interest to hold the elections, because this amount of money to spend second time, in several months, it will be just impossible. And talking about this money, the portion of this money is international debt. So it is the loan that we get from international institutions. And this is also kind of problematic, which is quite huge.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more question. So I'm going to group some of these questions. We have many questions regarding Nagorno-Karabakh. And really, it's essentially, do you think that this will influence elections in Georgia? How people vote? And then also from David Kramer, and you just answered some of this, Eka, but should we be concerned that the new rise in COVID cases will affect the elections and turnout? And do you see any parties using this as a way to discourage turnout or raise questions? So those are the kind of final two, both, you know, factors affecting voter votes cast and voter turnout. Whoever would like to.
Yeah, maybe I will. Okay.
Eka, please start, and then I will continue.
Okay, just yeah. So just to continue, the issue that I was raising. So yeah, I mean, I don't think that the numbers of the COVID cases will be used so by the government to postpone the elections for the reasons I have listed. I think that it's in their interest to hold the elections in October. But definitely and objectively, it will affect the turnout, of course, because if before the government was very effective in managing COVID crisis, now we see that actually our health system is not doing well, and we have increased number of COVID-19 cases, and there are more and more media reports that there are no enough places for the patients to, or the quality of the treatment is not appropriate or something like this. So and I think that by really moving the elections, so then we will, and it is unfortunate, but and I hope that the situation will not be developed so, but still knowing our health care system, one can expect that we will not be able to deal very effectively with increased pandemic. So that's why I think that it will affect definitely, but I don't think that the government will use the numbers in order to to postpone the elections or something like this.
May I add just very shortly about this COVID cases, and Batu will finish probably. Yeah, I agree with Eka, because we all know and realize that a ruling party is very much interested now to have these elections as soon as possible, because their rating is really increased for the last couple of months. But as the number of cases increases, and very dramatically for Georgia, maybe for other countries it's not very serious numbers, but for us it is. And we have still a bit more than 1 month ahead of elections, before elections. And if this situation continues, and it seems like that with every day we have more and more numbers with infected cases, I think that it's very important for the ruling party to realize that in either case, whether it's postponement of elections or conducting elections in this very severe situation, very serious situation, they should take this decision based on consensus with leading opposition political parties, and also NGOs which are leading monitoring organizations on elections. And I'm not sure how much they are realizing, but it really would be crucial for evaluating these elections as democratic and fair, because there should be consensus that yes, we are ready to conduct elections in these situations which is also poses serious risks for not only voters, but for so many people involved, like in elections on E-Day. Thank you.
Thank you. Just to follow up what Eka and Elene just said. Unfortunately, but we are in a situation that the government embarked on a path to use all possible circumstances for them to keep themselves in power. And quasi-legitimate reasons like social assistances or using COVID fund for labeling it as their own success or their party or party-sized assistance to the public to get their sympathies is, first of all, unfair, and it's already happening. Plus, as I mentioned, we see government trying to use other illegal networks to influence the voter turnout or their preferences. One component of it is the criminal network that has been quite significantly activated, and this organized crime is a Russian organized crime. It's just an organic part of it. Also, we see the attempts to use all possible means to lower the turnout through seeding apathy, also fracturization of the opposition political field is really not supportive in this regard. So all these components will affect, of course, the voter turnout, and definitely it will affect the overall perception of the election, whether it's fair or not. But sometimes something that government incumbent thinks that it's in their benefit might have a boomerang effect. So do not underestimate the economic hardship right now because of the lockdown. This lockdown really brought huge and unbearable economic conditions for most of the Georgian citizens, especially in the provinces or in the different regions. Plus, lari, Georgian currency is depreciating in an unprecedented manner. That will affect also the public predisposition, because really trust or confidence in the government is really minimal on everything. The government tried to ride the wave of building confidence, public confidence on managing the COVID, but I think that in remaining 1 month, public attitudes might be changing, whether they are confident to rest their hope on this government. So we'll see, but it's a very dynamic process. As for the conflict in Karabakh and Armenia and Azerbaijan affecting the Georgian voter turnout, especially the Armenian and Azeri minority populated regions. Well, if government is smart, they can and they could use it for the benefit of increasing turnout if it is in their interest, just clearly showing that they are Georgian citizens and Western oriented Euro-Atlanticist Georgia is really the only opportunity for them to maintain their cultural identity and also the economic prosperity and security. So again, as I said, this election has a bigger role, if probably it will not be an overstatement, but this kind of arguments really need to be brought. But government should lead in this regard. I don't see any coherent foreign or security policy. Georgian government, unfortunately, but tries just to follow the stream instead of taking leadership on some of the key components, especially when it comes to our neighbors.
Okay. Thank you. To all of the wonderful panelists, I know we have run over time a little bit, but I'm going to turn it to Jonathan Katz for just some closing remarks, but thank you so much.
Brittany, thank you for that, for the moderation, but also thank you to our panelists. And one thing that always strikes me about Georgia is that the political scene is incredibly vibrant, and there's no shortage of thoughts or opinions about sort of what Georgia needs to do to strengthen its democracy. I think in this context, I'm amazed at how COVID-19 is still shaping politics domestically in Georgia, even in the lead up. It's challenging. We see in the United States and how that impacts the elections. Also, how governments are responding. And I'm still struck too, sort of looking at some of the polling numbers, that people do think Georgia Dream has done a fairly positive job in terms of managing it. And what I also hear too is when I think about this election, pre-election, I think maybe it was maybe you mentioned this, is the need for other political parties within Georgia to explain what they would do, in these instances, how they would respond. Because I think part of what we're seeing is obviously there's a lot of politicking, but the most important, I would suspect, for Georgians, just like Americans, or if you're in Europe, is what are the plans behind parties in order to take Georgia to the next level in terms of a democracy, its Euro-Atlantic track. And I think you raised some very worrisome trends in terms of Russian engagement internally that sounds like that need to be investigated further, that need to be addressed by the government. And I think others will be watching closely to see that happens because there's equal concern about that same attempt of action, both in the United States and elsewhere in the lead up to the US election, presidential election. So we're very much aware. And I'm glad, Brittany, you mentioned, somebody mentioned the ASD report. Maybe that was Batu mentioned that, CSIS, ASD, GMF. There'll be a great event on October 1st that GMF is hosting on this exact issue. So please, join up and sign into that. But mainly, I just want to thank our colleagues from Georgia for joining. You provided a really important overview of sort of what's taking place in the lead up to the election. And I think, one of you mentioned that pre-election period is so important to watch. Oftentimes we spend most of our time focused on election day, which is also critically important. But one thing about our conversation is that there's this pre-election period, election day, and post-election. And it looks like to me, just based on numbers, we might not know what a coalition government looks like if it comes to that in Georgia. But one thing is certain is that Georgia will remain a priority for the United States, for the EU going forward. And I just think that as Batu mentioned, Georgia is at the center of this democratic challenge. And I think we know this looking at Georgia from Washington or the EU. And so I think that's why you have such a great audience participating today, those people who care about Georgia's future, those that are supportive, whether it's through assistance or engagement, and working with civil society, working with think tanks, independent media, and those that work with the current government and will work with future governments. And so I think one thing is certain is that there'll be this strong commitment going forward, and from GMF especially, to keep a spotlight of those countries that are on the front lines of democracy, and that's Georgia. So on that last note, thank you again to all the participants. Brittany, thank you for moderating. We look forward to our next conversation on Georgia, and I just have a great rest of your day, whether you're in Tbilisi or Brussels or in Bucharest or Washington. Thank you. Take care.
Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.